So we are doing 49 to 55 today. Next week, we're going to do 56 to 66, and that's it. That'll be our walk through Isaiah. As I said, I'd love to come back and the Wednesday after Thanksgiving for those who would like, and look at the two passages from Isaiah that will be coming up on Christmas Eve and the first Sunday after Christmas. And what I thought was that I would really let you all take over that session. And I'll give you the text beforehand and bringing to bear all that we've learned over the past, it'll be 9 weeks at that point. You might have some thoughts on the matter. And I think that might be fun and interesting. And then I could figure out what I'm going to preach on Christmas Eve. But before I do that, I want to go to the great question that I think it was Nancy that asked it last time. Why did God choose Israel? And I don't have a specific answer to that. I don't know. And when I get to the end of this, I'm just going to say I don't know. But it raises an interesting question, a theological pursuit that I talk about every once in a while called, the scandal of particularity. So scandal here is not being used in its normal way. Usually a scandal is something really bad and awful. If I was embroiled in a scandal, I would not want to be embroiled in a scandal. But the more original meaning of scandal from the Greek word scandalon means, anybody know? This is one of those words that you might know. If you know 10 words of Greek, you might know scandalon. Anybody? No? It means stumbling block. It's Paul uses it to talk about the gospel, that it was a stumbling block to Jews and to Greeks. And so the scandal of particularity is the hard questions around the particular ways that God breaks into human history. One of the features of the Judeo-Christian religion for 4,000 years is that God is not just a force or a being that exists like a cosmic watchmaker who made the universe and then sits back and watches it go from a distance, but that God constantly enters into our life, our common life as human beings. I mean, one of the claims of the Judeo-Christian faith for 4,000 years is that our God is the kind of God who would choose a person like Abraham. And then Abraham would then have a family whom God would choose. And then that family would grow into a nation that God would choose. And the scandal of particularity is that if God is going to be the kind of God who's going to choose a person and choose a family and choose a nation, that you can't do that choosing in a general sense. There has to be a person. There has to be a family. There has to be a nation. There has to be for the infinite God to break into temporal existence, there has to be times and places. And so the question, why did God choose Israel and not Babylon or Edom or Ammon or something else? We don't, I think, know exactly why God chose Israel, but God had to. If God is going to be in the business of choosing, God has to choose. If God is going to be in the business of breaking into temporal existence, then there has to be a time and a place and a person, a family, and a nation. And it happened to be Israel. The scandal of particularity gets even more interesting in the New Testament with Jesus. I've had people at St. Mark's say they have a difficult time with Jesus because he's from first century Palestine. And that's a barrier. Like, you have to go through a language that no one speaks anymore. You go through a culture that we don't understand, a social, an economic, a political set of circumstances that we don't fully understand to be able to get to understand Jesus. However, if Jesus was born in 5th century Siberia or 7th century Peru or 11th century France, we would just have a different set of languages and historical circumstances to get through to understanding the person of Jesus. If any of you are Jesus Christ Superstar fans, at the last big number, which is sung by Judas, he says, he sings, "If you came today, you would have reached the whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication." He's asking the question of the scandal of particularity. Why'd you come then when you could have come now and you could have been on television and have a social media presence? But if God is going to be in the business of becoming incarnate and entering into temporal existence, there has to be a time and a place. And the time and place happened to be first century Bethlehem. If you've never read Annie Dillard, you need to go to your first library you pass and pick out something. She is one of the most just beautiful writers. She says that Christ's incarnation occurred improbably, ridiculously, at such and such a time, into such and such a place, is referred to with great sincerity, even among believers, as the scandal of particularity. Well, the scandal of particularity is the only world that I, in particular, know. What use has eternity for light? Meaning that we need light. We need light in this time and in this place, right where we're at. We're all up to our necks in this particular scandal. I found this this is a little bit longer quote from the Center for Action and Contemplation, which is Richard Rohr's group, if you know him. Theologians call the principle of concrete to universal knowing the scandal of particularity. John Duns Scotus from the 13th century asserted that God only created particulars and individuals, a quality he named thisness, or hek-aity. Thisness grounds the principle of incarnation in the concrete and the specific. You can't really love universals. It's hard to love concepts, forces, or ideas. Love, God incarnate, always begins with particulars. This woman, this dog, this beetle, this Moses, this Virgin Mary, this Jesus of Nazareth. It is the individual and the concrete that opens the heart space to an I-thou encounter. Without it, there is no true devotion or faith, but only argumentative theories. The whole thing that God doesn't just work in generalities, God works in specificities. And I think this is one of those theological concepts which I find heartwarming, and I think we're going to see it in Isaiah tonight, because it also says that God does not just love us in a general sense, in a general swirling mass of humanity on some planet, flinging around a sun, but that God loves you right where in the chair that you are sitting at. God has loved you today. God will love you tomorrow through whatever joy, tragedy, or boring time you have, that God knows you particularly and specifically. Okay, that's my sermon for tonight. Any comments or thoughts?
That was really well over my head, but the only thing I was thinking was the prophecies and the fact that Jesus, a very important aspect of the Christ is the genealogy, proving that he was a descendant of Abraham and David. And that was really important to identify him as the Christ.
Mhm.
Yeah, grounding him in a particular family, right? And a particular story. It's not just the general story of humanity, but it's this story. It's Israel's story. It's, David's family, Abraham's family, Joseph's family.
Yeah.
Not even just the prophets and the prophecies, but the gospel authors. Like, we're constantly grounding him in that day, in that time, using the metaphors that people would have known then.
Father Rick, I always thought that, the reason that God chose Israel was because of the covenant with Abraham, that he would offer protection and land to Abraham and his descendants, and they must follow the path of God. And, them and their future generations would be someone to protect.
But so the scandal of particularity then says, then why Abraham?
Okay, yeah, that's
right. Like, again, that particular person who has a family, who has a nation, like it. The first 11 chapters of the Bible are a general history. It's the creation of the world. It's the story of the Tower of Babel and the flood, and it's not about Israel, one nation, one people. But then all of a sudden, at the beginning of chapter 12, it hones right in on Abraham. And there's a clear choice. God chose him. Why did God choose Abraham instead of his next door neighbor, Sam? I don't know. But
I have something to say there. What I read in that link that I sent you was that God chose Abraham because Abraham loved God, and God knew that Abraham would do whatever God asked. And it was a reciprocal thing going on there because, it was very involved, the reading, but I started it. And then it just grew into the whole nation because he knew he would teach his descendants, about God and being the only one God.
Yeah, I mean, God, I think, sort of knew it would work out. This was
part of the plan.
Yeah.
To start small, and then it extended it to the whole nation of Israel.
Right.
Okay.
I have a quick question. How many monotheistic religions existed during this time frame?
None. There was a brief period of time when Egypt was monotheistic. It was under the reign of one pharaoh whose name I completely am forgetting. That he destroyed all of the other idols to all the other Egyptian gods and focused only on one God. And then the next pharaoh came along and built back all of the cults to all the other gods. Other than that brief little one-person experiment in Egypt, monotheism is born in Israel.
And that could also be why God favored Israel.
Yeah.
Part of it.
Part of it. Yeah. But
but I mean, I think you could probably make an argument that if God had chosen Babel, then maybe Babel would have become monotheistic. But anyway,
it didn't.
Right. So
they had a lot of idols to overcome.
Yes. Yes. All right.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for going over anybody's head, but
this came up a couple of years ago after one of your sermons at Ridge Oak.
The scandal of
asked a question about it. We end up with this as being the reason.
Yep. Yeah. Anytime you ask why did God have to do that, then it's the scandal of particularity. Okay. So starting Isaiah 49 verses 1-6. Listen, foreign shores, to me, heed peoples far away. Yahweh called me from the womb. Notice, again, not to overdo this, but the particularity there, not the general. Yahweh called me from the womb. From my mother's insides, he made mention of my name. He made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand, he hid me. He made me into a burnished arrow. In his quiver, he concealed me. He said to me, "You're my servant, Israel. In you, I will show my majesty." But I myself said, "It was to empty results that I toiled, for futility and hollowness that I used up my energy. Yet a ruling for me is with Yahweh. My earnings are with my God. Now Yahweh has said, the one who formed me from the womb as a servant for him by bringing Jacob back to him, so Israel might not withdraw. And I have found favor in Yahweh's eyes. And my God has become my vigor. He has said, it's slight, your being a servant for me to raise Jacob's clans and bring back Israel's shoots. I shall make you into a light of nations, to be my deliverance to the end of the earth. So we start this section with that very tender Isaiah talking about God forming himself in his mother's womb. God made me, again, not just generally, but me in that person, in that womb. God made my mouth to do this. But then Isaiah realizes that there were some failures there, right? It was to empty results that I toiled. What's he talking about? What was that failure that Isaiah is lamenting there?
Disobedience to his command.
Isaiah was disobedient to God's command?
No. Just the people,
Israel
of God.
Yes, Israel was.
Yeah.
He's
out there preaching his heart out, and the people aren't listening to him at all, right? He's going, warning, warning, you've lost the way, and if this thing doesn't turn around, then we're going to be in for a rough patch. And no one turned around. And now they're sitting in Babylon. Their nation has been destroyed. They don't have their freedom. They feel like they have lost everything. And so we saw this at the very beginning. I think it was in the first session that we saw the other call scene of Isaiah, where has that vision of the heavenly temple, and he's there, and the seraphs are flying around and singing, "Holy, holy, holy," and he hears God say, "Who will go for us? Who will go into the world?" And Isaiah says, "Here I am, send me." And after that triumphal scene, God says, "And you're going to fail." Remember that? No one's going to listen to you. And everything. This is the fulfillment of that. He has failed. No one listened to him. But
what's interesting, in the translation, I have the New American Standard. They capitalize me in verse 3. And all of the references are my mouth. So it's sort of like Jesus. You could say this is talking about Jesus.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh,
in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Well, that's that dual nature of looking at Isaiah through 6th century eyes, and then post Jesus saying two different things. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, like verse 6, he says, it is too small thing that you should be my servant. My servant is capitalized. Yeah.
Well, not annotated doesn't capitalize like that.
Huh. That's kind of beautiful, though.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we're looking at this not through Isaiah's lens, but through the lens of Jesus, what was the failure? What was the to empty results that I toiled?
The failure of people to believe in him.
Yeah,
They made idols.
right. It's the failure that brought Jesus to the cross, right?
Mhm.
Which then becomes not a failure, but the ultimate victory, which is what happens for Isaiah. And, as we look through it through Isaiah's lens, no one listened to him. They ended up in Babylon, but that's not the end of the story, because they come back to Jerusalem. Jesus is in the tomb, but it's not the end of the story because the tomb is empty on the third day. It makes that last verse here, I shall make you into a light of nations to be my deliverance to the end of the earth. I think we would see that very clearly as Jesus, but from Isaiah's perspective, he's saying that Isaiah's ministries, Isaiah's words will be a light to the nations. And note there, it's not a light to Israel, it's a light to the world, which is how Isaiah presents the Babylonian captivity and then ultimate redemption, that going back to Jerusalem, that this will show the world that God exists, that God is all powerful and there, because even mighty Babylon fell. All right. Isaiah 49, 14 to 16, but Zion says, Yahweh has abandoned me. The Lord has put me out of mind. Can a woman put her baby out of mind so as to not have compassion on the child of her womb? Yes, but these may put out of mind, but I cannot put you out of my mind. Here on my palms, I engraved you. A couple things here. There's that rhetorical question: Can a mother forget her baby? And of course, the rhetorical answer that's meant to be there is, of course not. But even more unlikely than a mother forgetting her baby is God forgetting Israel. God will not put Israel out of its mind. And then the incredibly tender image: here on my palms, I engraved you. I wrote your name. That you all know I had Desmond Tutu as a professor in seminary. I remember one of the things he would say is that he would go into the townships of the little huts where Black people were relegated in South Africa. And he would go into these little Anglican churches there, and he would tell people who have been told their entire lives that they are trash. He would say to them, your names are engraved on the palms of God. And he would say, like, tears would be rolling down their eyes as these people who had been told they're trash their entire lives were then told that, God looks out for them. God cares about them. Again, another, the wonderful scandal of particularity. Isaiah 50, 4-9. The Lord Yahweh gave me a disciple's tongue. Don't think about that as a New Testament disciple. It's just the simple word for student. The Lord Yahweh gave me a student's tongue so as to know how to aid someone faint. With a word he wakens, morning by morning, wakens my ear so as to hear like the disciples. The Lord Yahweh opened my ear, and I didn't rebel. I didn't turn away. I gave my back to people striking me, my cheeks to people pulling out my beard. I didn't hide my face from deep disgrace and spit. The Lord Yahweh helps me. Therefore, I haven't been disgraced. Therefore, I have set my face like flint, and I knew I wouldn't be shamed. Obviously, like a few chapters ago, we, through Christian eyes, see Jesus here, right? Jesus did not, Jesus gave his back to people striking him. Jesus, was suffered terribly before and during his crucifixion. Looking at it through Isaiah's eyes, who was abusing him?
The king.
This is not,
king
say it
of
again.
Judah. King of Judah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I would probably. I mean, the king of Judah certainly didn't listen to him.
Mhm.
It's a little unclear. If you were interested, if you've got the prophet bug after going through Isaiah, and you kept going and started reading Jeremiah, talks about his sufferings quite graphically, how he was thrown down a well and he was imprisoned and he was beaten. Isaiah doesn't tell us those specifics, but you could imagine both Judahites and Babylonians abusing him because he preached against both of them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have those specifics, but he certainly alludes to it here. Wake up, put on vigor, Yahweh's arm. Wake up as in days of old, generations long ago. You're the one who split Rahab. Who's Rahab in this context again? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, the one who saved Jacob and saved the Israelites, the harlot.
Yes. Remember a week ago we found this, and in the Hebrew, that's a difference. The harlot Rahab is a different spelling than this Rahab. This Rahab is the one that's linked to Leviathan.
Oh, boy.
The dragon.
Oh.
Yeah.
The great dragon. It's another it's like Leviathan's nickname. So you're the one who split the dragon. And next line, pierced the dragon, aren't you?
Sorry.
It's okay. No.
Dragon lady.
That's Rahab. Yeah.
Mhm.
You're the one who dried up the sea, the water of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the restored people to pass, aren't you?
Mhm.
And it's allusion to the drawing back of the Red Sea and the people walking through on dry land. The people redeemed by Yahweh will go back. This time, not across the Red Sea, but back to Zion with resounding, with eternal rejoicing on their head, as joy and rejoicing overtake them, and sorrow and sighing flee. I am the one who's comforting you. Who are you to be afraid of a mortal who dies? It reminds me of that great verse from Romans 8. If God is with us, then who can be against us? Like if I'm with you, if I'm drawing back the water and bringing you home, why are you going to be scared of Babylon or Persia? Like we're all going home, folks.
Mhm.
The early part of this, it goes back to, I think we talked about it, I think last week, where there's the metaphor of water over and over again in the Old Testament as that element of chaos. And you only have to have lived through a flash flood or a hurricane or water in your basement to know how disruptive and powerful water is. And throughout the Old Testament, God is the one who controls the water. In the two great stories that anchor the Old Testament, creation and Exodus, in both stories, God controls water. God takes the waters and splits them from the waters above and the waters below. And then he creates land and he says, here's the water and you're going to go no further. And then there's the Red Sea that splits and comes back together. And then there's the River Jordan that splits and comes together. God is the one who brings order to chaos. And the people of Judah who are living in Babylon here have undergone 70 years of utter chaos. And God is reminding them, I will bring order to this, and we're all going to go home. Remember where we ended up last time, where God is calling his people to go home. And then we said that the people have been living in Babylon for 70 years. So some of them aren't excited to go home. They just want to stay there because it's all they.
Those schools are good.
Isaiah 52:7. This is a great verse. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of one who brings news, one who lets people hear all is well, and one who brings good news, lets people hear of deliverance or salvation, who says to Zion, your God has begun to reign. Whose feet are we talking about here?
The prophet.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, certainly in the 6th century, Isaiah is the one whose feet are bringing good news to the people in Babylon. Now, put on our Christian lens, and who's the one who brings good news?
Jesus.
And anyone who follows him. I think, people certainly have seen a reference to Jesus here, but it's also, our feet are meant to be ones who are bringing good news to the world, right? Our feet get to be lovely.
I think priests are part of this too, perhaps.
Sometimes, Roger. Thank you.
What about sentinels?
Is that what yours says?
Yeah, that's down there in the little notes.
What
Footnotes.
you say?
Well, it says it's not really clear who they're referring to. They just say it was a sentinel.
Yeah, after a battle was won, after a victory was won, there would always be someone who would ride out and bring the news back to people. And that would be like a sentinel. That we won.
Here's an interesting note. It says, here the news refers to the return from exile.
Yep.
Could be part of it.
Yep. Of course. Yeah. We're coming home. Good news. All is well. After so many years of not being well, things are about to be well. I mean, that should strike us today, right? Like, it would be nice to get up on Sunday morning and be like, people, all is well, right? We did it. Whatever that looks like. Communion wine again, all is well. Like we're getting back to normal.
Absolutely.
So here is probably a familiar passage to you. It's one of these passages that comes up towards in Lent and in Holy Week and even on Good Friday. But as I read this, I want you to listen through those at least dual lenses. Like, what is this saying to God's people in 6th century Babylon? And what is God saying to us post crucifixion and resurrection? He was despised and the most frail of human beings, a man of great suffering and acquainted with weakness. As when people hide their face from someone, he was despised, and we didn't count him. Yet it was our weaknesses that he carried, our great suffering that he bore. But we ourselves had counted him touched, struck down by God, and afflicted. But he was the one who was wounded through our rebellions, crushed through our wayward acts. Chastisement to bring us well-being was on him, and by means of his being hurt, there was healing for us. All of us, like sheep, had wandered. Each had turned his face to his own way. Yahweh, he let fall on him the waywardness of all of us. So what do you hear in that?
Well, now you're
Jesus
talking about.
Christ, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
The story of our Lord, really. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems so clear, right? Anyone who's, read the story of Good Friday once, this is obviously that's what it's talking about. Of course, Isaiah and his people listening to this, reading this, 600 years before the crucifixion, would have heard something else. This is and what they heard is a bit of a mystery. So in Isaiah, the phrase that's been coined is the suffering servant, that there is suffering servant. Some have identified it as Israel itself, like sort of embodied. Some think of it as God. It certainly isn't Isaiah. When it talks, all of us like sheep had wandered, obviously it's talking about the general populace. Any other thoughts as to what Isaiah might have heard here?
Well, they often refer to it as just the servant of the Lord who was being, he was definitely the Lord's servant, but he was being persecuted and was suffering for everyone. But it's very inspecific about what,
Yeah. I mean, remember that verse we looked at last week where we first encountered the servant? It said, Israel is the servant. It was super clear. This here is less clear, which I think is why Christians have for 2,000 years said, well, obviously the clear thing is that we're talking about Jesus here.
Yeah, I think we can understand that.
Mystery.
But I wonder what our Hebrew friends would say about that interpretation.
Right. Yeah.
That certainly is not theirs.
Absolutely not. Right.
Yeah.
Which I think we go back to we're not exactly sure what Isaiah's people were hearing here. Like, who is this suffering servant? If it's not Israel, if it's not God, who is it? But you can hear in it the echoes of suffering that they went through as a people, right? You hear echoes of the reason we went through this was a great deal because of our own actions. Like like this terrible thing has happened, and we are to blame. And also this immense sense of trust that our wayward acts have been, we have been delivered from them.
They may have thought it was a reference to the Messiah. They did have that sense.
Yeah. I mean, and there were various times in Israel's history where they were looking for a Messiah figure. And so, yeah, then I think they would have certainly seen that.
C.S. Lewis, in his book on the Psalms, talks about Plato conceiving of a suffering servant, that this would have been the greatest of all, to be totally virtuous and yet suffer. I don't know if you read that, but it really struck me. It was very interesting that this was a Greek who came up with this.
I am not familiar with that part of Plato at all.
Am I saying the right person? I think it's Plato.
Okay.
And this was in a book that Lewis did commentary on the Psalms towards the end of the book.
Hmm.
And I'm almost positive it's Plato.
Okay. I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
But even again, all these references to he, him, his, they're all
All capitalized in your Bibles. a very clear theological statement that this is God, that Jesus that we're talking about.
Yeah.
God in Jesus, right?
Well, none of that's capitalized in the
Right.
library.
Right.
Hmm.
And of course, in the original Hebrew, there are no capital letters. So those in the original, there was no capitalization.
Yeah, in my version, that last sentence there actually says, "But the Lord laid upon him." So there's not even a he; it says the Lord. So
Right.
it's very specific. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the in most.
So that's the same here, but it's to fall on him is where it's capitalized.
Right.
So the Lord is God the Father, God Almighty, all caps, Lord.
Right. So that's where the most Old Testament translations don't translate Yahweh as Yahweh. They turn Yahweh into the Lord in that little capitalized form, not the normal capital letter O.
Lord, all caps.
Right. All small capital letters. As that's that ancient way of saying we're going to protect God's name. We're not going to use God's. We're going to instead of saying the name, we're going to say the Lord. This translation that I'm working from is preserving the original, which is Isaiah used God's name. So,
Cool.
Which here I think is a little clearer, because if you're reading this just through Christian eyes, the Lord let fall on him the iniquity of us all, then we would, the Lord Jesus, we would immediately think of that. But to know that Isaiah specifically says Yahweh, we're talking about God the Father there.
That's why I like this translation, because it makes it clear when we're talking God, it's all caps, Lord.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the Oxford Annotated actually, that's one of the few places where it capitalizes L-O-R-D are all capital.
Yeah.
Lord in the same way.
Right.
Stephen was just saying it.
That's standard English translation practice.
Mm-hmm.
You may remember when we did the forum on the 10 Commandments, I brought up that fellow John Mark Comer who wrote the book God Has a Name. And his whole thesis there was that God gave Moses his name to use. And you will call me Yahweh, forever and ever. And then we stopped calling God by his name and we call God just God or the Lord. But it's an interesting, there's not a right way or a wrong way there, but it's interesting to think about. Do we listen to God and call it's like when I say, don't call me Father Rick, just call me Rick. You're right. Like, don't call me doctor, just call me Joe. Don't call me God. I'm not just a general God. I'm a specific God, and my name is Yahweh. Right. All right. 54, 7 through 10. Here, for a short, I'm reading my notes instead of the text. For a short moment, I abandoned you, but with great compassion, I'll gather you. In a burst of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment, but with permanent commitment, I'm having compassion for you, because this is Noah's water to me, that I swore that Noah's water would not pass over the earth again. So I'm swearing not to be angry with you or to reprimand you, because mountains may move away, hills slip, but my commitment will not move away from you. My pact, my covenant of well-being will not slip. The one who has compassion for you, Yahweh, has said. We talked about the theological quandary of, so God choosing Israel and saying, you're my people, I'm going to be your God forever and ever, you're going to be my people forever and ever. And then the people fall off the path. The people don't live up to their end of the commitment. And so it doesn't mean that God's covenant with them is torn up, but God has to punish them. There has to be, like I might have to take Zoe's phone away from her, even though I love her very dearly. God, like a good parent, has to come in and say, no, we have to stop doing that and start doing this. But here he says, I'm not going to, just like I did with Noah, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm remembering you, and I'm choosing you. Okay, this is the last one that I have for tonight. Because my intentions are not your intentions, your ways are not my ways. Because the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. My intentions than your intentions. Because as the rain or snow falls from the heavens and doesn't go back there, but rather soaks the earth and makes it bear and produce and gives seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so will my word be that goes out from my mouth. It will not come back to me empty, but rather do that which I wanted, achieve that for which I sent it, because you'll go out with joy and be brought in with well-being. The mountains and hills will break out before you in resounding. All the trees in the open country will clap the palms of their hands. Instead of the thorn, a juniper will come up. Instead of the briar, a myrtle will come up. It will be a memorial for Yahweh, a permanent sign that will not be cut down. Again, we come back to that theme where God isn't just dealing with people, but God is dealing with all of creation, and that all of creation are joining in with this great tale of woe and disaster, and it becomes a tale of joy and victory. It's known not just in the faces and the words of the people, but it's known in the landscape. I always love the trees will clap their hands.
It's going to be a joyous return.
Yeah. Because God's ways are not our ways. It's possible for things to go badly. And then it is also possible for things to be made right again. And it's possible, in fact, for things to be even better than they were before. And that's all I have for tonight. Before we have a general discussion next week, we're going to finish up. It's the last 10 chapters. And it's a pretty joyous last 10 chapters. There's far more joy than woe to you. So